Hello everyone. Today we begin our session number 8 of the UPSC CSE, the ethics paper. Last time, if you recall, we had finished our discussions regarding socialization. Okay, so we covered it in about 1.5 sessions, and we discovered socialization as a process and as a concept, its positives and its negatives from multiple aspects. And I think if you collect all the points, we would have covered about 24 points, 25 points. All right. So today, the focus is going to be belief versus knowledge. How do you separate beliefs from knowledge? Okay. Is it that beliefs can become knowledge? All right. Then I'll give you a brief introduction to attitudes. And that is because this is very important, that introduction is very important for you to be able to understand beliefs in the proper perspective. Okay. As we begin, let us spend, let's say, 5 minutes on socialization, a relevant aspect of socialization relevant to our current session. Okay. I was telling you that every society has a certain social order, okay, or a social arrangement. So you can imagine this as a ladder, which is, you can call it the SEP ladder. SEP ladder. Now, what does this mean? Do not go searching for this term. I must alert you, this is my term, so that you are able to visualize things easily. All right. It means social, economic, and political ladder. Every society around the world, when you start analyzing it, you will find that there are certain classes, social, economic, and political classes, which are sitting right at the top of this ladder. Some classes here, and that is how society gets stratified, classified in one sense, from the biggest beneficiaries or the largest beneficiaries of the current, let's say, of the current social, economic, and political order that prevails in a society. Order is also arrangement. That means these classes are arranged in a particular manner. There are some people who are the largest beneficiaries of the current SEP order. Some of them are the least advantaged or the lowest or minimum beneficiaries of the current order. Some of them could derive indirect benefits or little benefits from the current social, economic, and political arrangement of the society. It is very natural that these people at the top, the largest beneficiaries of, let's say, the economic policies, economic structure, economic mechanisms within a society, the political influence, the political power, political representation in, let us say, the parliament, whether it was British Parliament, in my previous session I gave you an example, or any parliament or congress of the world. Okay. So there are people who enjoy these special privileges. So they would least be interested in the current SEP order being changed. Okay. These people at the bottom typically would lead miserable lives. they would have very less rights and representation and lowest benefits derived from the current order. Okay. Therefore, any society absolutely dislikes. Okay, so this is a cross, you can just imagine it like swords. At the same time, it is societies don't like. Don't like what? Societies do not like revolutions. You can call it any kind of rebellions, or maybe you can call it mutiny. A strict no, because if you change the current SCP order, the largest beneficiaries, the biggest beneficiaries, and those who are deriving some benefits because of this order, their economic prosperity, their social status, their political influence in the system is seriously threatened, gravely threatened. Okay, that is why societies don't like this. Also, if you remember the example of sati that I gave you, okay, so that means societies typically do not like any kind of fundamental changes. Fundamental changes in what? Let us say the culture. Anything that threatens the culture of the society. Culture will have four aspects: norms, cultural values, cultural representations, cultural beliefs. I have already explained this, as you are aware. Okay, they don't like any changes. Okay, whether it is culture or the SCP order. SCP order. Now, societies don't like anything that is new. You can also call it newness. New cultural norms, new cultural values, new cultural beliefs, new cultural representations. They absolutely resist it. Okay, and therefore you can say they don't like anything that is new or different. Okay, so these are typical characteristics of a society. All right, so as a bureaucrat, when you're trying to make changes, let us say you're in charge of a district, you're trying to make some changes to a district. Every district itself also has a certain SCP order. You must be very careful that they don't like any of this. Accordingly, your strategy will be made. All right, accordingly, the sensitivity of the situation will be considered. The context itself becomes very different. Okay, it becomes more challenging because you must be aware of this. Okay, you can, for example, let's consider a micro unit of a society, which is a family. Every family would also have an SCP order. Large extended families, some are bigger beneficiaries, some are lower beneficiaries. How they resist and derive here within a family, it may not be political, okay, although you could classify it as political, because there is power struggle, there is power dynamics within a family. Who gets to make decisions? All right, who's going to be in authority? Who will determine the distribution of economic rewards amongst different people. What kind of, within social, it is also education, cultural, religious. So they try and dominate and control that part. All right. So I am deriving this. Now we go to discussion of beliefs. But you must remember, this is just one aspect out of multiple aspects of socialization. Okay, let's go to belief and knowledge. I'll start with the example, an international example, then we'll come to deeply personal examples. Okay, personal for each one of us, because we want to really understand what are beliefs, and then we arrive theoretically at the various characteristics of beliefs. All right. It is a belief amongst a lot of people that the 16th President of United States, Abraham Lincoln, was somehow a very kind and compassionate man who had a lot of respect and conviction in human rights, human dignity, and therefore he fought the southern states and initiated the American Civil War. Okay? Although the southern states attacked first, but their entire narrative of American Civil War is as if President Lincoln was championing the cause of the black people, because he had such a good heart. He was so empathetic and compassionate that he wanted to free the slaves from the slavery. Let us examine this belief. And I must tell you, if you do a superficial search of this topic, that's the narrative you will be met. Search deeper, ask deeper questions, okay, and suddenly a very different narrative will emerge. So for this purpose, I'm going to draw quickly, let's say, the map of United States without drawing Alaska and other parts like Hawaii or overseas US territories like US Samoa, Puerto Rico, Puerto. Okay, here we are touching Maine. We come back. There is, then we draw two lakes. Okay. So that is where we get the map of United States. And let's separate Mexico from it. Texas. Okay. I hope you're familiar, as students of civil services, you're very familiar with various maps, geographies, etc. Very quickly, 2 minutes. Where is Oregon, Washington, Idaho, Montana, South Dakota, North Dakota, South Dakota, Wyoming, Nebraska, Kansas, Missouri, Arkansas, Colorado, Utah, Nevada, California? You should be, the world map you got to master. Okay. Now coming back. American Civil War was fought between the northern and the southern states. So both of these went at war. In 1860 and it finished in 1865. This is when Abraham Lincoln was elected the president. This is when the war got initiated, American Civil War. This is when the American Civil War came to an end and slavery was abolished. But let's go back to the belief. All right. To examine the belief, we'll have to go about 70-75 years before this. Okay, it starts somewhere around, not somewhere around, but definitely around 1787, where something called a 3/5 clause or 3/5 compromise was reached. Now, what is this 3/5? We're trying to understand how noble were the intentions of Abraham Lincoln. Okay, 1787, something like 3/5 clause or compromise was reached between the northern and the southern states. What was the background? Southern states had slavery, okay, because it was agriculture dominated. So the southern states wanted the black population to be counted for the purpose of more political representation, which means political representation. Remember the SEP that I had drawn there? Political representation means they wanted more seats in the Congress for each of their states, so they could dominate the United States Congress. Okay, and they could dominate, the southern states could also dominate more number of judges in the judicial system. So they wanted control in the Congress and control over judicial system, which they effectively had for 50 years out of total of 70 years before this. So look at this. This is approximately 73 years. In these preceding 73 years, the southern states for 50 years got more seats in the Congress and more judges appointed to the Supreme Court. All right? Because they got the black population to be counted for the purpose of seats. Please do not confuse it with black people voting rights or black male voting rights. Quickly, the black males were given voting rights in 1870. So here this was not about black people voting rights. More representation for southern states. Taxes, well, they did not want to pay taxes on their slave-driven economy. The E part of SEP. Okay. What else? They absolutely did not want to give any rights to the black people. This is southern. What did the northern states want? Northern states wanted no political representation to be decided, no seats in the Congress to be decided because of the black population of the South. Exactly the opposite part. All right, they did not want the black population to be counted at all. So if you don't count black population, the number of seats for southern states would decrease. Actually, that was what the fight was all about. Okay. Then they wanted the southern slave dominated or slave driven, slave based economy to be taxed. And they also did not want black people to be given rights. So this was before 1787. So this, whatever I have written here is before 1787. In 1787, the northern states and the southern states, they reached a compromise. So what they said is, the black population will be counted as 3/5 for the purpose of determining seats to the Congress. That means one black person is not a whole person, but is 3/5. So that means 5 black people here will be counted as 3 black people for the purpose of determining the seats in the Congress. That is what was called the 3/5 clause or the 3/5 compromise. That means a black slave was not a whole person, but 60% of that. Alright. Now, this was the 3/5 clause. When Abraham Lincoln came in, this was the fight that they were fighting for. Political representation versus no political representation. They said black population should not be counted. They said black population should be counted, and then they arrived at a compromise in 1787. When Abraham Lincoln came in, they had already suffered 50 years of no majority in the Congress and in the US judicial system, the Supreme Court. So they wanted to wrest. This wrest is W-R-E-S-T. They wanted to snatch back this power of the South. Okay? Therefore, the Civil War got initiated between here and here. It was a battle of dominance, political, economic. On the social part, they agreed. Black should not have any rights. Now, Civil War ends. The American Civil War ends and abolishment of slavery. Abolishment of slavery. Okay. But abolishment of slavery did not get them voting rights. In 1868, they just finished off the 3/5 clause here. They just finished the 3/5 clause here. 1868, this thing was ratified in the constitutions of the southern states. In United States, states have their constitutions. 1870, the black men were given voting rights. If you heard about Ku Klux Klan, you must watch history and documentaries. Okay? The Ku Klux Klan came in to discourage black men from voting. This was the 13th Amendment. This was the 14th Amendment. Okay? This was perhaps the 15th Amendment. Okay? This was 13th, 14th, 15th. Finally, in 1920, I'm just skipping for your GK purpose, white women were given voting rights. 19th Amendment. Okay? It was only in 1965 that black women were given voting rights. And there was something called literacy tests. Literacy test. Who can vote based on minimum literacy? So even after black men were given voting rights, their voting rights were practically taken away by the southern states between 1890 to about 1915, because they started introducing literacy test for the population. So the black population were given very tough literacy tests, and the white, illiterate, poor people were given very easy tests. Okay? When white, illiterate people and poor people who did not have education could not even clear those tests, the easier tests, there was a grandfather clause introduced that anybody's grandfather who had voted before 1867 was automatically eligible for voting. Think about it. Would any black person's grandfather ever have voted before 1867? No, because they got the voting right in 1870. So by introducing the grandfather bill or grandfather act, they practically defranchised all the black population, black men again from their voting, and enabled all white men, even if they were the poorest, illiterate, to be eligible for voting. Okay? You see the kind of struggle. So I'm not getting into things like what is Ku Klux Klan, how did they discourage the voters, how did they go about looting, plundering, burning, all kinds of heinous crimes to terrorize the black population and get them not to vote. Okay? So we're not getting into this. We are not getting, for example, into what was Jim Crow laws. Very important. These were laws of racial discrimination. Okay? So they came out with something very new. Discrimination, racial segregation, that the whites and the black population will be completely segregated. They cannot travel in the same compartment, they cannot study in the same school, they cannot enter the same restaurants. Complete segregation, okay? Apartheid. All right. So very important, because you're going to be also reading a lot about history, you need to know about it. Now think about it. Was Abraham Lincoln's fight for abolition of slavery, or was it more of a political and economic and power over judiciary? Was that the fight between North and South, or was it freeing the slaves? From the North's perspective, was it about freeing the slaves as a moral high ground for Lincoln? No, that's the narrative. So what we figured out is that belief, howsoever deep we hold it in our hearts, that belief is wrong. Okay. That belief is false. Let's discuss beliefs now, because I've already said that means even if you deeply believe something, unless you verify, unless you have a justification, it doesn't become knowledge. Knowledge has to be true, justified. There has to be justification. Now you got a justification. Now your false belief that was false got converted into knowledge. If you still resist that, it will remain a belief. Okay? Alright. There was some reason people who attended that lecture number 6 or seen the video of session number 6 would really appreciate why I said whenever you talk of B for beliefs, draw something like this, like a beaker, water, a straight rod which appears distorted, okay, because of refraction, This I gave you more like a visual cue to suddenly flood your mind with a lot of clarity about beliefs. As Plato said, all these kind of visual cues, okay, or mnemonics, the memory tricks or visual tricks, etc., you will need them only till the time, till the point where you have not reached complete conceptual clarity, until you have grasped the truth fully. You need all of these aids, memory tricks. Once you grasp the knowledge, once you arrive at the truth, okay, you would never need any visual cues. Okay, but this is just to trigger your memory so that even in a very stressful situation like the civil services main exam, at least that picture could flood your memory with lot of terms and characteristics. Okay, all right. Belief. We want to know how is it different from knowledge. Let me take another pen. How is belief different from knowledge? Supposing there is a clock. Supposing there is a clock which is stopped. A wall clock which is stopped, or any clock that is stopped. And it stopped at 8 o'clock. Still, twice in a day, it shows the right time. Okay? If by chance, by coincidence, by sheer luck, okay, I asked you the time and you told me it is 8 o'clock and it was actually 8 o'clock, you would be true, but not because you have any justification for it, because it is by chance, via a coincidence, it is true. Okay? Now, let's get ahead. I'll use this example of wall clock going bad at 8 o'clock. Knowledge. Knowledge has three components. Therefore, we call it the tripartite theory of knowledge. Three-part theory of knowledge. One is true or truth. Second is verification. Normally we use a word called justification. So can I just place it like justification, justified beliefs. That means knowledge comprises of something called beliefs that are true, not because of coincidence, sheer luck, okay, not because of gut feel, sixth sense, instinct. No. Knowledge becomes knowledge, or a belief becomes knowledge when it is true based on verification, when it has justification behind it. Okay, that justification could be empirical. I've already explained in one of my lectures earlier. Empirical is like when you conduct some kind of an experiment. You do a scientific study, a social study, a cultural study, a psychological study, okay? A study like you do in physics, experiments that you do in physics, chemistry, etc. Or logic and rationality that we use in subjects like mathematics, philosophy, okay? So, but it has to be verified and justified. We'll take a very interesting example for distinguishing between this. Beliefs, on the other hand, could be true. Right here, below this, you should write per chance. That means by chance, coincidence. Just an instinctive feeling, gut feeling, sixth sense. Okay? No verification. Okay? The right word is there is no justification that you have. Okay? So it could be, beliefs could be true, or beliefs could also be false. If it is false, then obviously it is not knowledge. If it is true, but you haven't verified or justified it, still it does not become knowledge, because knowledge needs verification and justification. Okay. Now, let's talk for a moment about attitudes, because it is relevant to our discussion here. So, I'm going to write it again in a little different way for a visual cue for you. I think this is the first time we're talking of attitude, and it's an introduction. Attitude is a psychological tendency to examine and evaluate an attitude object. Okay? And there is definition continues. But let's kind of try and get it in our mind in a more simple manner. So attitude is a psychological tendency to, what is psychological and what is tendency? We'll talk about this. Whenever you come across a word that you're not fully able to comprehend, understand its meaning, it could be a simple word like tendency. I would strongly urge you, I recommend that always look for synonyms. Maybe one of the synonyms would help you grasp that term or understand that term much better. Figure out the synonyms in your native language also. Maybe one of those words used as synonyms in your native language has a natural appeal to you and you really understand the context of that word. Okay? So tendency means an inclination, a direction. Okay? So what we are saying is attitude is a psychological tendency to, it's a psychological inclination. It's a psychological direction that in that direction you will go. To, this is E, so I'm going to use it E to write E X A M I N E, to examine and evaluate. This E stands for examine, E stands for evaluate. That means one thing we immediately get is attitudes have an aspect of evaluation. We're doing evaluation. Okay? A psychological tendency to examine and evaluate. What? Evaluate an attitude object. Please write an attitude object. You may draw it, but write an attitude object with some degree of favor or disfavor. So we are under attitude, we are evaluating an attitude object, which I'll explain what are objects. Okay, there is a complete understanding you must develop. And right now I can tell you anything that you can judge, anything where you pass a judgment, wherever you have a conclusion, wherever you draw a distinction like good and bad, right or wrong, justice, injustice, okay, appropriate, inappropriate, desirable, undesirable, okay, indesirable, okay, undesirable, sorry, attitude, object with some degree of favor or disfavor. That means attitude is not about evaluation of something very specific. It is a broad evaluation. Favor, disfavor. Okay, two very broad terms, favor and disfavor. So it's like saying either you like it or you don't like it, but it's not about something very specific. With a degree of favor or disfavor towards this. Now that favor or disfavor, whether it is favor or disfavor, it determines your behavior towards this object. B. Okay, I'll write it a little larger. It determines your behavior towards this object, or your outlook towards your object. Behavior, we'll explain this. An outlook is how you perceive, outlook towards something. How do you view it? How do you see it? How do you perceive it? Maybe you can write it down. Outlook can be how do you view it / how do you perceive it, how do you see it. Now let's go through the whole definition. Attitude is a psychological tendency to examine and evaluate an attitude object with a degree of favor or disfavor that determines an individual's behavior towards that object or an individual's outlook towards that object. Okay, so couple of terms we used like psychological, and then we said behavior, then we said perception. Since we are not talking of attitude, that's not our main point. What I wanted to draw here is we evaluate things under attitude. In session number 6, I had also mentioned something called opinions. Okay? Opinions, as I told you, opinions are shallow level thinking or surface level thinking. Okay? That means opinions are not about some deep introspection, a very deep rational deliberation. It's not a very engaged formal thinking process. Opinions are more casual. See, I do not want to repeat most of the things. It has been explained in great detail in session number 6. So refer to your notes. This is what I wanted to tell you. Okay? Although when we get into attitudes in detail, we will speak about that attitudes have 3 components to it. Okay? 3 components how I evaluate this. One is called the affective, A-F-F-E-C-T-I-V-E, affective. The second is behavioral, and the third is cognitive. Okay. Right now, for purpose of sticking to our main topic, you may like to note affective, emotions, feelings, sentiments, okay, moods. So please note it down. Affective is basically emotions, feelings, emotional attitudes or sentiments, and moods. So we will study later on a model of James Russell, R-U-S-S-E-L-L, James Russell. We'll come to understand more about behavior and cognition when we're studying attitude. That's a huge topic in itself and needs a much deeper understanding. So attitude is about evaluation with some degree of favor or disfavor, but it determines our behavior and outlook towards this thing. Okay, so I'll just take this off till here, and this is not needed. All right, now let's come to beliefs. Beliefs have no evaluation. There is no examination of something and evaluation. Let me give you a very simple example here. You appear in your CSE mains, your answer sheet comes, okay, you've written your answer, submitted. Now there is somebody who is examining and evaluating. So some professor is looking at your answer sheet and evaluating, he or she is examining each one of your answers and evaluating and awarding you some marks. That is examining and evaluating. This is what I'm telling you is an analogy, okay, for the purpose of your easier understanding. So attitude is like that. But imagine your result coming out. Let's say the result which is announced. The result where somebody, let's assume somebody is announcing the result and says, let's say Rakesh so and so got so many marks. Okay, now that is a declarative statement. You're declaring Rakesh, whatever the surname, secured so many marks. It is a declarative statement. It is also descriptive. It describes accurately how many marks did Rakesh score. So it's a descriptive and a declarative statement. So it is both declarative and descriptive statement. When, let's say, a child is looking at the sky and says, the sky is blue, the little child is trying his or her best to describe accurately what is the color of the sky. So it's a descriptive statement. The child, through the same sentence, is also declaring the sky is blue at this time. The sky is blue at this time. Clouds are white at this time. Same way, like you say, scientific facts. If you were to say, water tends to freeze at lower temperatures, you're trying to describe the state of nature of water. Okay? that it freezes at. Are you evaluating it? No. You are trying to accurately describe something. You are trying to, water boils at high temperatures. You're trying to accurately describe the property of water, how it interacts with either heat or with cold. So you are declaring it. It's like a scientific declaration of facts. Okay, it is also a description of facts. But somebody who's checking, who's examining your answer sheet and evaluating it and giving you marks, that is like analogy for attitude. Somebody who's announcing the result, analogy for beliefs, declarative statements. And let us say there was somebody, you took it to your professor and said, these are the marks that I scored, and the professor casually remarks, oh, that's not a good performance. So you tell him the marks, looks at it and says, that's not a good performance. Opinion. Okay? Or that's a wonderful improvement. Opinion. Okay. So attitudes. Oh, I rubbed this off. We'll need attitudes. So I'm just going to say, let me just put it as ATTI with a large E. Let's maintain our visual convention for attitude. Okay. Now let's examine. We've already examined Abraham Lincoln, your belief about Abraham Lincoln. Now we will examine some of your beliefs that could be very personal in nature. Okay, so let's imagine this is something called hypothetical thought experiments. Okay. You can write hypothetical, imaginary, thought experiments, hypothetical. So please completely imagine yourself in this situation. I'll also imagine myself in this situation. Okay? It is hypothetical, so there is no need for getting offended, etc. Alright? Sure. Let's say, that's your father and this is you. Okay? Let's give the child a gender neutral name. Gender neutral. Let's call him or her Bobby. Okay, so you are Bobby. That's your father. So, supposing I was to ask Bobby, and Bobby replies to me something like this. My father is a role model for, I'll have to change the pen, for our community. We can also imagine, now you're no longer the child Bobby, but you become this adult. Now Bobby has grown up into this adult. Okay, it's you. Could be me. Okay. And again, you repeat the same thing. My father is a role model for our community. Now, this is something which I call as BICA examples. Okay, BICA. Don't write BICA. Okay, right? Beliefs are implicit core assumptions. Implicit core assumptions. By the time I'm just through with this, you will start appreciating why I wrote it as BICA. Now, since you said this, I'm going to question you. Something like what Socrates would have done. So when we come to Socrates, and I tell you more about Socrates, you'll discover Socrates employed a method of questioning called Elenchus, Elenchus, Elenchus. Okay? Socrates never gave lectures, never explained. His method was Socratic questioning or Elenchus, which in the end would destroy somebody's hubris, a sense of hubris. Hubris is when people are very arrogant. Arrogance, okay? Pride. So, Socratic method he deployed called Elenchus, which destroyed people's hubris, leaving them puzzled, perplexed. Now being puzzled or perplexed means now they are not very sure. Okay, so let's employ kind of the same method that Socrates would have employed. Just also remember this, knowledge is true, verified. Okay, so when Bobby, that means you or me, when we said this, there are a couple of questions here. Number one, Bobby is claiming that this man is his father. How verified, how justified? Bobby, it is Bobby's belief that that man is his father. That's the first part. How does Bobby come to know of it? Little child. Because everybody told him so. So Bobby made a core assumption without verification or any kind of justification that this man who's playing the role, okay, and because everybody calls him Bobby's father, therefore he must be Bobby's father. So Bobby says he's my father because everybody says so since childhood, and this man is playing the role of a father. Let us consider a couple of situations. So when Bobby says this, the first thing is, the assumption here is, does Bobby say my biological father is a role model? No. But when he says my father, does it default? Is it implied? Is it understood? Is it inbuilt that when he or she says my father is talking about biological father? Beliefs are implicit core assumptions. You never challenge them. Your thoughts never even reach that stage. What's a belief? Belief is when you hold something very dear to your heart. You might even hold hatred for somebody very dear in your heart. You may hold deep skepticism or suspicion or hostility for somebody deep in your heart. You may even hold vengeance, pratishod, badla deep in your heart. Okay, that is what it is. Belief is like a judgment that you will never examine. Will Bobby ever examine this? Will you, the Bobby, in this hypothetical thought experiment, ever examine this? Examine and evaluate. Attitude. Examine and evaluate. Is Bobby ever going to examine this? Biological. Okay. Can it not happen that perhaps when Bobby was an infant, Bobby's father lost his life in war or some kind of a terror attack, or because of some illness, because of some accident, or another situation is where Bobby's parents divorced. His father could have lost his life in a war, terror, illness, accident, or perhaps they got divorced. So this man that Bobby imagines may not be a biological father. Okay? Maybe Bobby was, and the second situation is maybe Bobby was an orphan. उसके parents नहीं थे. So this kind, compassionate person with foundational empathy adopted Bobby as his son or as his daughter. But Bobby has never been told of this. Even if somebody was to tell Bobby, that is a core assumption that you are actually challenging. Therefore, it is likely, beliefs have this quality where even if somebody was to tell you the truth, you will be ready to fight for it. You will be ready to fight for it. You won't accept it because that acts like foundation of your entire world. Entire world means foundation of your thinking. That's where the whole thing, the way you perceive the world, the way you see the world, that is where it all begins. Okay? Maybe Bobby, so there are two cases. Maybe Bobby was an orphan, maybe his father died or the parents had taken a divorce. So when he says, my father biological, okay, let's go ahead. Okay? Here I am also going to ask, let's say Bobby. How many men in the community, apart from his father, has he evaluated? How many men? Has he evaluated only his father? Or is that an assumption? This whole thing is an core assumption? Or has he ever verified, does he have justification and therefore arrived at truth? And therefore what he's saying could be knowledge only if Bobby has verified, has a justification and proven it to be true, either through some scientific observation, study, experiment, or some what we call as infallible logic. Okay? Incontrovertible logic. That means a logic that doesn't fail. Okay? And therefore he arrived at this conclusion. So how many men have you deeply examined and evaluated, then out of them, then you came out and said, this individual who happens to be my father is a role model for our community. So if you have not done this, if you have not evaluated, examined other men, then Bobby has not verified or justified, therefore it becomes a belief. This particular fact, these facts, Bobby has not verified, justified. It could be true simply by chance. I hope you noted down truth, true by chance, per chance, a coincidence, okay, a gut feel, instinct, sixth sense, whatever you might call it, but not verified or justified. All right. If Bobby indeed compared his father, the individual, with other men in the community and then came out with this, men or other women, because men of women of the community, of our community, if that is true and verified, then it is indeed knowledge. Otherwise, it is a belief which could be true or false. All right. Now, following the Socratic questioning, we'd like to ask Bobby, who's grown up now, and Bobby is you. Okay. Hypothetical thought experiment. Do you understand what is a role model? A role model is somebody whose actions, behaviors, whose language, whose personal values, whose rules or principles, whose intentions, achievements, all of them can be perfectly imitated. So I could ask Bobby, does he or her understand what is a role model? I can ask Bobby, recollect in your childhood and even in your adulthood, did your father display unnecessary anger? Can you recollect whether your father had multiple instances of anger, especially where it was not needed? Did you ever receive a punishment? Did you ever receive a punishment that was not fair? A positive punishment or a negative punishment which was not fair or which was not just? Whether your father punished somebody or you which was not fair. Did you see your father a little fearful of something and the source of fear was not justified? Okay. Did you see your father being disgusted at something, disgusted at some community, their festivals, their food, their fashion, their literature, their religion, their beliefs, their lifestyle? Did you see your father being disgusted or holding other people in contempt who were fundamentally different, new or different than what your father is? Did you accept him? Do you see him accepting newness, changes? Did you ever see him being happy when somebody else was suffering? Like some other community or some other person whom he did not identify, when that person was suffering or through some sheer bad luck or something happened, did you see your father being happy? Did you see your father being sad at things or at events where it was not, where he really didn't need to be sad? Did you see him surprised or startled, appearing shock at things which were very predictable? Okay, that means he made some kind of a wrong judgment. These are all anger, fear, disgust, happiness, sadness, wrong judgment, wrong behavior, perhaps using bad language, wrong, unacceptable language. Okay? Did you see him holding other people in contempt? What have I done? This is nothing new. We've all discussed about it. This is nothing but Dr. Paul Ekman's universal biological root emotions. This is Paul Ekman's universal root emotion. Okay? Then I can continue my questioning. Bobby, did you see your father unnecessary having a sense of shame about something, being embarrassed of something, feeling guilty about something? Did you see him being jealous or envious of other people? What I've done is, I've straight away deployed Dr. Paul Ekman's theory of emotions. Okay? The classical theory of emotions, which is also called Atlas of Emotions, that he developed along with Dalai Lama. Session number 1. Everything is coming from that. We're using what we have learned. Your success in this paper, in the ethics paper, will really be dependent on if you can start seeing the entire syllabus as integrated, one whole. Even the disagreements between philosophers, differing philosophies, even they'll contribute to the dialectic. I'll explain this term later on. Dialectic. Okay? Two opposing forces coming together to create something new. Alright? So I'm actually using that. Okay? Did he inflict, did you see this person, your father inflict pain, punishment, other people, treat other people unfairly, injustice? Do you recollect things which is where he actually was not about harmony, family harmony, community harmony, harmony at workplace, etc. Okay, and I'm not even going to questions that asking Bobby that are you aware of any incident where your father indulged in corruption of some kind? Could be material, okay, it could also be moral corruption of some kind, etc., etc. Okay, we are not even talking of things like that. How soon does your father own up mistakes? Has your father ever displayed, uh, let us say, insatiable appetite, an appetite that just doesn't get satisfied? Could be for food, drinks, and other sensory pleasures in life. That shows, if that is the case, it shows very low amount of temperance, self control and restraint. So I could ask Bobby about his father's self control and restraint. Combined together, temperance, TEMPERANCE, temperance. Okay. Then I come to the last part. Why did you say our community? Why not some other community? And what do you mean by our community? People who are exactly like you, follow the same cultural norms, have the same cultural values, hold the same cultural beliefs, have the same political ideology, economic ideology, social ideology, okay? Or he treats, or other communities are people who have different, new or different ideologies, social, economic and political ideologies than your father. See, a single sentence can be analyzed and we're just getting started asking the question. So I'm going to leave this here. Now I hope you've understood why beliefs are never examined. Beliefs never examine, never evaluate. They are held as a, beliefs are held as a personal, as I explained in that session number 6, they are held as personal truths. Look at the word personal truth. It's not universal truth. It's not objective truth. It's your personal truth. Personal is, you can also write subjective. Because a person is free to have emotions about this attitude object of any kind. Feelings, emotions, feelings, sentiments, emotional attitude, desires, preferences, they are all subjective. Okay? And subjective also, we have already sufficiently covered that subjective also means mind dependent. I hope you recall subjective is mind dependent because we've already discussed GEM and SCOM's example of the shopper's list. Okay, and the theory is called direction of fit. Okay, personal truths, you can say personal facts or personal convictions. Beliefs are personal truths, personal facts, personal convictions, very much like this. Okay? Basically, these are beliefs are implicit core assumptions that we have in life. Remember Abraham Lincoln? Remember that sentence that it was not British bracket people who ruled over India. It was British bracket state or the crown. The British crown, the British nobility, aristocracy, the wealthy landowners and the farm owners, their club who were most represented in the British Parliament, okay, and the British crown that ruled over India. Okay, fair. So the method that we just deployed is one part of Socratic, what do you call it? Socratic questioning, which is called Elenchus. Beliefs are implicit core assumptions. Now, I will leave you to also figure out, what kind of sentence would you like to make about your parents as a whole. My parents are ideal parents. My parents, question mark. Okay, ideal, question mark. Who did you compare them with? Question mark. In isolation or with 10 other parents or 100 other parents, etc. And when you said parents, do you understand the concept of parenting? What is ideal parents? What is parenting? What are parenting styles? How did you arrive at this conclusion? Did you verify? Do you have a justification for that? Analysis, scientifically done, okay? Reasoning employed, experiment done. How? It will also be when you say, for example, if Bobby said, my parents are ideal parents. So a simple thing would be like, let's imagine these are your parents together, father and mother, okay? In many cultures, you can even have same-sex parents, right? Okay. So is it that your father and mother put together are perfect? That means if this is definition of ideal, let us imagine this is definition of ideal. Let's say this is your father and this is also your mother who's ideal. So this is father, this is mother. So both of them are ideal and they overlap to create two ideals, creating a whole ideal as a unit, or are they not ideal separately but they are ideal together? They could be ideal separately. If this is the definition of ideal, is it like one of your parents is like put together they become ideal? Individually they are imperfect, put together they become perfect or ideal? Is it that means one of the parents positives, okay, and the other parents positives and this parents negatives, is it balancing it out like this? I hope you get my point. Is it that if this is the definition of ideal and you still call them ideal, one of them is like this, more towards ideal and very less ideal, but put together becomes ideal? These are examples of core assumptions that we may carry in our mind as the final conclusion, as the result of your paper. Not examination and evaluation of your answer sheet, but as the final result, conclusion. Okay. That is why we say beliefs have this quality that is neutral. It's not evaluative. It's the final conclusion that you're carrying. Okay. Therefore, that day I told you, you can imagine beliefs as a safe, a bank vault, or a bank safe, vault, locker, whatever. Attitude, examination, and evaluation. Once you've done this, attitude will give you, let's say, a fact, which now becomes a fact. Evaluation and everything has already been done. You can imagine beliefs like all the personal truths and personal facts that you hold in mind. It's like a database of facts. Okay? Let's say these are 20,000 facts, 40, 50, 60,000 facts. These are facts like jewelry held in a bank account. Nobody can take it out, nobody can put in. Even you find it not very convenient to every day go and change your jewelry, take out something and put in something. You can do that theoretically, but practically you'll feel, arey yaar, who's going to go to that place and take out the jewelry? It's too much cumbersome. Good analogy for your beliefs. Okay? And therefore we said beliefs are rooted in your norms. Everybody, it's a social principle. If somebody is acting, playing the role of Bobby's father, must be Bobby's father. It's a rule. Okay? Norms, they are deeply rooted in values. Therefore, you are willing to fight for it. Values, the ones that you hold very dear to you, they are rooted in your personal truths, facts, convictions. Personal truths, facts, and convictions. They are rooted in your culture. They are rooted in your ideology. This is something that we have not covered. This is where your facts are. And because you hold facts like this, if somebody comes and challenges these facts, you'll find that these are very deeply linked with, because attitude also had an affective component. Affective, which is emotions, feelings, emotional attitudes or sentiments. Okay? Then we talked about behavioral. Behavioral has things like your desires, your preferences, your drives. Something drives you to do something, or something drives you not to do something. Your drives, your motives. Drive, motive. So when we say, what drives you? What are your main drivers? What drives you to, let's say, do exercise every day, study every day? What drives you? And then there is a thing called motivation. Motivation lies half in behavioral and it lies half in feelings. Anyway, we will discover more of this when we talk about attitude. We talk of a philosopher called David Hume. Sentimentalism. I just told you, emotional attitude is called sentiments, sentimental evaluation. So when we study David Hume, we'll study his concept called sentimentalism, and then we'll get more and more into exactly what is motivation, and you will understand it with a lot of examples. So I'm just going to now define beliefs. They are fixed. What fixes them? What fixes this? We've just learned norms, values, your truths, culture, everything comes from socialization. It comes from, that is why we covered socialization. Okay? So your norms, values, truths, all of this comes because of your socialization. As I told you, socialization is about the first primary unit of socialization. Primary socialization, family. Then comes secondary socialization. Okay, secondary socialization would be friends, peers, then a lot of things which are part of components of socialization is religion, education, art, literature, rules or laws, role models, significant individuals, media, entertainment, events. Then we said slogans, and finally we said your social structures, social order, economic order, political order. To know more about it, this is all covered in session 6. All right. So this is socialization. Now, we should come to a simple way by which we can also understand and define beliefs. I would suggest below this you can imagine, let's imagine a building under construction, and imagine that the foundation has already been laid, and then they are raising columns. Imagine this as foundation, columns, later on beams will come. So that's how a building is constructed. Can you change the basic infrastructure of a building? Infrastructure. When you later on complete the building, can you replace the foundation? Can you replace columns, beams? No. But you can always replace a wall. If the building is made basis of purely columns and beams which can fully support the load, internally you can redesign anything. You can remodel, you can repaint, refurbish, rebuild a wall, you can replace a wall. Okay, you can modify it in any way. The things that you keep modifying, you can move furnitures, you can put up new wall hangings, replace the curtains, replace your carpets, furniture, etc. Those are opinions. But what you find it as infrastructure is something that is not movable. Beliefs, that is why we said core assumptions that you have. Somebody can agree with you because beliefs are internal, opinions are expressed. Opinions are surface level, shallow level thinking. So somebody under pressure, as I covered in session number 6, opinions are fast and easily altered. They are fast and easily altered. They can be fast and easily altered under social influence, social pressure, new knowledge, new discovery. So opinions will change. Your beliefs, in philosophy and ethics, we use a word called immutable. Immutable. Mutation, immutable. Mutation is when change is there. Immutable is highly resistant to change. Therefore, beliefs are structural. Is this structural to the building? Yes. Beliefs are structural, immutable, foundational. You can also write fundamental, premises. Premises means assumptions. Beliefs are structural. They're part of structure. They are structural, immutable, highly resistant to change. And foundational bracket fundamental premises, assumptions. Therefore, you cannot change belief of somebody. Okay, opinions can be changed under pressure, okay, and with new knowledge, or even if I simply reframe my sentence, you could actually agree. Okay, if I'm let's say a doctor and say and somebody's mother or father is gravely ill, let's say some heart thing is there, if as a doctor I say it has a 99% chances of success, this operation has 99% chances of success, versus I saying this operation has 1% chance of failure. Does it appear different? If there is a welfare policy announced by the government and we say this policy is like a safety net for people who are vulnerable, for the vulnerable sections of our country, of our nation, we are bringing this policy as a safety net, versus I say this policy is like a handout to poor people. I can easily influence. When I say I, it means anybody can easily influence your opinion simply by reframing. So 3 sources for opinions to get fast and easily altered. New knowledge, because you don't have commitment behind opinions, unlike beliefs for which you will fight. New knowledge. Second, reframing and social pressure, social influence. Okay, so this is beliefs. Knowledge, you understood now. We've covered this, I think, finally. So, do you think, just a last fun fact, fun question. I'm going to ask you a fun question. And I'll draw something and ask you. Something to think, and you can tell me in the next session or write in the comments. Okay, I'll draw something quickly. Has it started looking like representing something? A new pen. Okay. When somebody in this role said parasites and cockroaches, I want you to go back, think and tell me whether that's under attitude, whether it's a belief, whether it is an opinion. Okay, that's just one part of it. Second is when we come to meta-ethical theories, as I mentioned in one of my earlier videos, we will analyze that statement of parasites and cockroaches from 10 different meta-ethical perspectives, 10 different meta-ethical theories at the finest level. We'll analyze the same statement from that. For now, I want you to think about whether it's an attitude, whether it's a belief, whether it's an opinion. Okay? And I end this class by introducing something like, would the same individual, is the same individual undergoing or has recently undergone something called point to think is, would this gentleman have said the same thing, cockroaches and parasites, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago? Has this gentleman undergone or is undergoing something called resocialization? Or is he attempting to do something called normally proactive socialization is done when you have certain aspirational group. You want to belong to that aspirational group. So before even joining that group, for fulfilling your aspirations to join that group, you start adopting their norms and values and beliefs and their representations. You start adopting somebody else's ideology. Okay? You start adopting somebody else's culture, attitudes, etc. So when you start doing that, in order to fulfill your aspirations to join a particular group which seems aspirational to you, is proactive socialization. So is this a case of proactive socialization or re-socialization? So earlier it was socialization. This was the question where I said, would the same gentleman have said this 5 years, 10 years, 15 years ago? Or is it a case of re? Re is typically RE is used for back. BACK, back. Okay, that means again. Re is also used for again. Again socialization, or again backward socialization. Okay, backward socialization as in a direction. So you're going in this direction, now you come back in the other direction. So you have kind of changed your path, direction. Okay, with this we'll stop. Next time we will talk to you about, I'll talk to you about ideology and value theory. So two things for next time. Ideology and something called value theory, because I have not been able to cover what are objects. We'll cover it next time. Okay, so object, the discussion typically falls either in attitudes or under value theory. All right, till that time,